Why is Goblin Piledriver never sad? Because he has protection from the blues.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further, as you can use the promo code MTGMudsta to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back to what is the first Conquering Your Commander that I've done in almost 2 years, if not longer. This is Conquering Your Commander, Mistform Ultimus. Now right off the bat, I'm sure the first question everyone is going to ask is why would I pick Mistform Ultimus over a card like Orvar? They cost the same, they have the same power and toughness, and in the Void, Orvar should technically be better because it has 2 abilities. Well, today I'm here to tell you that more is not always necessarily better. In this case, Mistform Ultimus is a deck that I wanted to build where I wanted to focus heavily on running only tribe-based lords. You can definitely do that in Orvar, but the caveat is unfortunately in order to use Orvar's abilities, you have to water down the deck by running a lot of instants and sorceries that target your own stuff. This causes you to have to make cuts to the list that you might otherwise not want to do, and could potentially lead to some dead draws later in the game. Now I'm not saying you can't build Orvar as a tribal deck. In my testing, I just prefer my Mistform deck. With the debate out of the way, even if it's not necessarily to your liking, what makes Orvar a tribal deck? Well, it's the fact that Mistform Ultimus is every creature type. This means that you can run any Lord type effect, which is usually something like +1/+1 and gives an ability, in this deck, and it'll get it. This is a pretty underwhelming ability when compared to some other mono blue commanders, but if you're looking for one that wants to smash face in combat, Mistform will do a pretty good job of just that. Wizards of the Coast has done a pretty good job over the years of supporting tribe-based decks, and Mistform Ultimus can certainly benefit from it. Mono blue certainly has its pick of pretty fun tribes, with creature types like wizards and merfolk being some of the strongest available to mono blue. I'm also pretty partial to running some of the slivers, because they're able to also provide some much needed evasion to Mistform as well. I wouldn't recommend going particularly heavy on that tribe though, since Gale Rider Sliver and Shifting Sliver are often enough. Merfolk also offer a pretty sweet package, with cards like Master of the Pearl Trident, Lord of Atlantis, Master of Waves, and a Merfolk Sovereign, all providing +1/+1 and some unique abilities. Merfolk Sovereign can certainly do a lot of work in this deck, providing Mistform with unblockable and being able to smash in for some lethal commander damage. Merfolk aren't done though with cards like Sage of Fables and Stony Brook Banneret, providing the deck with cost reduction or alternative ways to pump or draw cards. If we shift our focus to the wizard side of the tribes, you don't necessarily get as much power and toughness from them, but what they lack in strength, they make up for in utility. Azami, Lady of Scrolls, is scary by herself, and being able to tap Mistform to draw a card at the end of someone's turn isn't bad to have. One of my favorite ones, however, is Galecaster Colossus. This giant is actually a wizard, and allows you to bounce permanents back to opponent's hands, needing only tap a wizard to do so. One of the strongest wizards you could possibly include is a patron wizard, and it embodies the aspect of utility over power and toughness for the wizard tribe. Providing our wizards, which, might I add, merfolk have a lot of, with the ability to counter opponent's spells by only tapping them, is a huge impact on any game. Yes, they're able to pay the mana to stop that ability, but it's a mentally taxing effect since you have to calculate how much mana you have and if you can cast spells, while still having to worry about how many wizards I have on my side of the board. I would also recommend running some clones, since what's better than lords? Well, 2 copies of that lord. One of the best lords to copy is a Mirage, and getting 2 untap or tap triggers whenever you cast a merfolk, not to mention Mistform Ultimus, can lead to some pretty swingy turns, especially if you have Nykthos on the field and are able to tap it and untap it for mana. While not necessarily a tribe of its own, Changeling cards actually function really well in the deck as well, like a Universal Automaton, Amoeboid Changeling, and Shapesharer, all being able to enter the battlefield and get all of the pumps from the lords, not to mention triggering things like Unesh, Cryosphinx Sovereign. Unesh is probably one of the few lords in the deck that I don't actually support actively, as Sphinxes typically tend to be very expensive. I do run Unesh because it reduces the cost of Mistform, and casting my commander for only 2 is pretty sweet, and that's not even factoring in that you get a Factor Fiction as it enters. Shifting away from creatures, since we're so focused on making sure that this is a tribal tribe deck, you're going to want to run cards like Arcane Adaptation, Xenographed, and the newly printed and incredibly powerful Maskwood Nexus. This will allow us to maximize on what creature types we have on the field to get pumped the most by the lords, and at the same time with a card like Nexus, continue to grow our board state into a threatening presence by making more and more blue shapeshifter tokens. I'm not going to dive too hard into what mana rocks you should run since everyone has their preference, but something you should consider is the lack of recursion from graveyard that mono blue has. Especially when you're running creatures, I think it's very critical to focus on ways to get them back to your hand, because losing a lord here and there can add up over time and really weaken your board. That's why I consider cards like Elixir of Immortality and Sword of Light and Shadow critical to the deck, since they can get those lords back from your graveyard into your hand or your library. If you're looking to break the bank just a little bit to spoil the deck, one card I would highly recommend is Commander's Plate. This provides Mistform Ultimus with a pump, not to mention protection from black, red, white, and green. Not only does this protect him from targeted removal, it also allows him to get through almost any blocker, which is so versatile considering it only costs 1, which means it can be found by a Trinket Mage, and costs less to equip onto your commander. A card I've had a lot of success with against decks that have expensive mana bases is a Quicksilver Fountain, which can easily shut off a Gaia's Cradle, although it can become a bit of a headache tracking which lands have become islands. Mirage Mirror is also a fantastic addition to the deck. Much like many of the lords, this costs 3 and does have an activation cost, but it can be a bit of a combat trick since you're able to swing your team into someone's board, and if they think they can trade profitably, you can activate it to become another lord, and all of a sudden, as opposed to trading, they're now losing their defenders. As far as the land base goes, you can run expensive cards like Cavern of Souls and name whatever tribe you want like Merfolk or Wizard since it'll protect most of your creatures, but it's not entirely necessary. You're going to want to run a lot of basics, but I would say one of the strongest lands in the deck is actually relatively inexpensive, and that's Path of Ancestry. If you tap it to cast any creature in this deck, you're getting a free scry which adds up so quickly and is able to get rid of any dead card off the top of your library that you wouldn't normally want. Riptide Laboratory is also a nice card that's been recently reprinted, and allows us to save our commander, not to mention some critical wizards like Venser or Azami if we need to. Griffin Canyon is probably one of the few lands that I really had to find, and it's probably the silliest addition into the deck, but it's actually worked out pretty well for me in a couple games. All it does is untap Mistform and give him +1/+1, but untapping Mistform to draw another card, or potentially pumping him to be lethal, on a colorless land isn't really asking too much of the deck. The number one land card that gets asked why I'm running it in this deck is probably Sliverhive. Sure, it's not a particularly good card because it comes in and only makes colorless mana or colored mana for basically 3 creatures in this entire deck, but it makes tokens. Most of the creature cards in my deck focus on pumping creatures, so being able to make tokens at the end of someone's turn, plus having something like Arcane Adaptation out to make those slivers into wizards or merfolk, basically means that I'm paying 5 mana to keep making a bigger and bigger army. So the deck really wants to beat face, and that's all well and good, but unfortunately in EDH there are some times where you're just not able to do that, whether that's because your opponents have a bigger board than you do, whether they're playing a Peacekeeper, who knows. So what all good decks need to have is a plan B. In this case, the plan is to win through Azami and Mind Over Matter. By tapping a wizard, in this case Azami, you get to draw a card. You're then able to discard a card to Mind Over Matter to untap a permanent, which would be Azami again. You're then able to tap her to draw a card again, and keep doing this over and over again to draw out the library. Now normally drawing your library out would cause you to lose, which is why we're going to run cards like Laboratory Maniac, Thassa's Oracle, or Jace Wielder of Mysteries to provide us with that alternate win con condition. I typically try to avoid tutoring for these cards since it kind of ends the game abruptly and doesn't always necessarily feel good, but at other points where it basically feels like the game's stalled out, I'm really thankful to have them in the 99. As always though, this deck is ever changing, much like its commander, and with each new set introducing fun and exciting cards I want to test out, sometimes I might miss out on someone's favorite card. So if there's a card that's worked particularly well in your Mistform deck that you don't see in my list, please let me know about it in the comments below. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.